I work with Tony and Ashley and several other people on this call. I am what is called a security technical specialist. I have been at Microsoft in January. It will be 10 years, which seems so difficult to believe. And I've been in IT for probably 20 something years now, covering Active Directory, Exchange, security, storage, all kinds of good stuff. But we're here today and we're going to talk about Defender for Endpoint. Tony, do you have any other slides besides this one that you were going to show, or is this just the intro?
That's just the intro, but I just want to say thank you for everyone attending. Thank you, Andrea, for presenting today. And if you, for those of you in the audience, if you do have questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat window, and we'll save some time at the end for some verbal questions. So with that being said, it's back to you, Andrea.
Absolutely. So today we're going to talk about Defender for Endpoint, which is one of my favorite security tools, though I think I'm like a parent. All of the tools are my favorites, probably just depending at what time. I'm going to steal the screen share from you, Tony, and I'm going to show 2 slides, and that is it. And then we're going to jump straight into the Defender for Endpoint console. Just like to start off with this one to do a little bragging, right? Security, we are a leader in 5 Gartner Magic Quadrants, including endpoint protection platforms. This is very tiny, but this is us way up here in the upper right-hand side. And that covers our entire endpoint protection platform, which is Defender for Endpoint. And then let's take a quick peek into what is Defender for Endpoint. Now, it's had a couple of different names, so you might have heard it called Microsoft Defender Advanced Threat Protection, or in the beginning, it was Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection, because in the beginning, all we did cover was Windows. But we'll jump into that as well. So the Defender for Endpoint is a little 6-legged octopus. I'm sure there's a name for that. But there's a couple of pieces to the pie. It starts with attack surface reduction, which is actually a Windows 10, Windows 11 built-in feature, but it does add some additional protection to help shrink your attack surface. And that includes things like network protection, controlled folder access. This could take a whole hour in itself to discuss. Also, next generation antivirus protection, malware protection, so which is Defender Antivirus. Now, the great thing about the Defender for Endpoint EDR tool is you can absolutely use Defender Antivirus. In fact, the two are better together, like a Reese's Peanut Butter Cup. But you can also, if you have an antivirus that you love already, if you're using McAfee or Symantec or any of the other ones out there, we don't require that you use it. You don't have to use Defender AV. You can absolutely use one if you already have a 3-year contract signed. That's great. It does work better together, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but not required. The endpoint detection and response features. When we first introduced this, I think it's almost 6 years ago now. The great thing about having a cloud service, it allows us to just grow in leaps and bounds. We can update things on the back end. So we're constantly adding new features and functions, and we'll show off some of that new stuff today. We also have the ability to auto remediate actions. So if we do detect something bad happening on your devices, we can fix those either automatically without human interaction, which is our recommendation, but we also have the ability to make a recommendation and wait for a human being to go ahead and say, yes, please do those things. We also have some great security posture tools, which really are some of my favorite features, and we'll dig into that, as well as advanced hunting, which I call going looking for trouble. And we'll spend a little time on that as well. But let's go ahead and we're going to jump into.
Quick question. So when we first put this event together, we were thinking we titled it, protection for clients. But can you kind of provide a little overview as far as what devices or platforms are supported?
I will in just a minute.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
So this is the main Defender for Endpoint console, but where you would respond to security incidents. But we're not going to start here. we're actually going to start in settings, and we're going to talk about just what Tony was mentioning here. So when it comes to the Defender for Endpoint console, we have the ability to onboard all different kinds of devices. So when it comes to Windows 10 and 11, as well as the newer flavors of server, the sensor is built into the operating system. So you don't have to install anything. Now, we do have what we call the onboarding process, which is really just a script that gets run on those devices, and it lights up that sensor and says, hey, start sending information up to the cloud. Now, the other operating systems that we do feature are Windows 7 and 8.1, older flavors of server, as well as Mac OS, Linux, iOS, and Android. So anything other than Windows 10 and 11 and the new flavors will require the deployment of an agent. And those can be done with SCCM, with Intune, with group policy for Mac and Linux with things like Puppet, or if you have another tool. But all of those, we just run a simple script to onboard them up here into Defender for Endpoint. Then we look at what operating systems, we talked about what tools we can use, just like we said, group policy, Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager, right, SCCM, or my mobile device management, Intune, and we can even onboard some VDI as well. Now, while we're here in the administrative console, let's talk about a few other things. We'll get the housekeeping out of the way, and then we'll jump in and do some of the fun stuff, like incident response. So when we talk about the Microsoft tool set, now Defender for Endpoint stands perfectly strong on its own, but if you do own some of the other Microsoft tools, so if you own Defender for Office, let's get down here. If you own Defender for Office, right, Office 365 Threat Intelligence, if you own Defender for Identity, which used to be called Azure ATP, if you own Cloud App Security, which got a new name as of last week, it's now called Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps, we can easily, with a slider button, connect those tools with a handshake, and they can start sharing information back and forth so that you can get even a wider view of how an attack might go across your entire network. Did it come in through email? Did it pass through a machine? Did an identity get compromised? And we'll take a look at all of that as well. We also have a couple of the ability to integrate with Intune, either for management functions or to deploy the package, as we talked about earlier, and several other cool features, just like the ability to do that auto remediation or live response, which we'll talk about as well. One of the newest features that has become super popular during the pandemic is the web content filtering feature. Now, previously, a lot of web content filtering happened when our network traffic from our clients was going through the proxy or the firewall. But now that people are sitting at home, now some of you still may force them to go through that firewall, but certainly lots of people are not. So we've lost that ability to control, or at least manage, maybe a better word, where our users go. With the Defender for Endpoint sensor and the web content filtering feature, we can very easily create a policy that will help us manage where our users go. Do I want to prevent adult content like gambling? Or do I want to prevent peer sharing, right? Any of these kinds of things, maybe I'm super mean, no games, no social networking, right? I can prevent all of that literally with a click of a button. I can apply it to all devices or even just a select group of devices. So I could create multiple policies because maybe my marketing folk do need to get to social media, or maybe, I want to block a few things, but I'm going to let my legal team get there for some reason. But you can absolutely scope this into the way that works best for you. We also have the ability to do some great role-based access control by creating some device groups. You may have some device groups, maybe a certain team manages building 1 or legal or however you decide to do that. But we can build some device groups as well. And then those can be managed in particular ways. They can be by domain, by if the name starts with, maybe you just want to group all your Windows 10 devices together or all your Android devices together. Anyway, so that's, I'm going to call that the boring housekeeping stuff. But let's go ahead and let's jump into some of the more fun stuff like doing incident response. Now, the team who's going to respond may start here. You can also have incidents forwarded via email, or if you're using something like ServiceNow or Jira, we have a partnership that if an incident gets opened here, you can open a ticket in that tool. But let's assume that we have been alerted in some way, shape, or form, and we've decided we're going to jump in here and take a look and see what's going on. So we see here on the main page that we've got 175 active incidents, almost 600 devices, some active threats going on, right? But what we're really going to do is jump in here and take a look at incidents. So in the beginning with almost all EDR tools, to be honest, everything was centered around alerts, so individual alerts. But as you saw, we had, hundreds of them. So the way we have worked is to group those items together into an incident. So you're not individually responding to all of these, though you certainly can if that's the process you like. But what we've done is improve that process by grouping them together by incident. And let's talk about how that works. So in Defender for Endpoint, there's always the circle, which always will bring up a flyout menu, or the ability to click directly on a link, and those will do two different things for us. But if we see here, there's a series of alerts. Let's give that a second to populate. Maybe I'll be impatient. There we go. And so you can see these are all of the alerts that came in, right? And you can see that there are different categories, different impacted entities. The information may have come in through identity, through email, multiple ways that that data could come in. But what we're going to do now is let's pivot into the actual incident. Now, this is a new incident view, and I really appreciate this. We can see a whole summary of what's going on here, right? So we can click here and we can see we had 3 alerts that had to do with initial access, right? These are all following the MITRE attack framework. Dean, don't ask me what MITRE is again, but if you want to come off mute and talk about what MITRE is, I'm happy to have you do that. I'm going to assume that means he's not going to. But we have 3 alerts that had to do with initial access, 2 alerts that had to do with execution, 2 for persistence, 1 with defense evasion, right? As you can see, we go on. We can see the timeline here, right? What happened first? At 11:41, a suspicious URL was clicked on workstation 6 by K. Dickens. Then honestly, less than a minute later, a potentially malicious URL was detected in the mailbox. Then a suspicious sequence of exploration activities. We can see the scope here, right? How many devices were impacted? How many users were impacted? How many mailboxes were impacted? And these are the top impacted entities, and they are listed here from the things we think you should investigate first. So the ADFS server looks like the very first thing it suggests, even though it's a medium risk, it must have some reason it thinks we should dig into that first. then the workstation on our way down. We can also see that there were 33 entities found, and we could dig into those as well. But let's take a peek here into the alerts, right? And again, you can see devices, users, mailboxes, etc. So we have 16 alerts, and you can see again the title, the severity. Why is it a part of this particular incident, right? Why did this alert get selected to become a part of this multi-stage incident? We can hover over here and see why, right? So there was a URL similarity, similar emails, the message ID signature, could be same device, could be same user, same time frame, right? Multiple reasons that they are grouped together. We can see what that MITRE tactic was. What were the entities? Workstation 6, Carla's name, the ADFS server, right? Again, what was the source? What was the time, right? And again, we have the circle that will bring us up that flyout, right? And what is this going to tell us? We can quickly decide if this is a true alert or a false alert. We can set it from new to in progress, and we can assign it to a person, right? So if we want to assign this work so that I can assign this to Ashley or Tony for them to get started, or even assign it to myself, and they will take responsibility for closing out this particular alert. We get some information, the times, what source reported it, and then we can get a nice description. A user opened a potentially malicious URL based on a Defender for Office alert. What should we do, right? Validate the alert, inspect the reported process that opened, right? It's going to give you a nice idea here of what actions you should take. And more importantly, what other parts of the incidents do we need to look at as well, right? Again, we can do the same thing that we did before. It's either circle or click, but we're going to go ahead and dig in here. And this gives us, again, Workstation 6 and K. Dickens, Carla here, are our main entities on this action. Now, this is a new feature that I really appreciate here. And this is called the alert story. What happened, right? And I won't read this whole thing to you all, but you can see, right, what happened. A user opened a potentially malicious URL, right? And this gives you that whole idea of what should we do, what could have happened, right? And then we can see that chain of activities, right? What happened? We can see there was a JSON file that Carla opened. We can see that that particular LabSim.exe, that file, that JSON file, opened the link, right? We can see that that suspicious URL link was clicked. And again, if we want to, we can actually pivot in and take a look at that link. And we just follow that process all the way down to see what happened. There's always more information to dig into here. Sometimes, honestly, too much information, because you can forget that maybe what we should have done when we saw that Workstation 6 was a high risk, and Karen, who's an account manager, you know what? Maybe what we should have done, let's pivot into the device inventory and let's go find Workstation 6. So Workstation 6. See, again, we get a nice overview of Workstation 6. What do we know about it? Domain joined to the domain seccxp.ninja. Now, one of the great things about Defender for Endpoint is we don't care if it's domain joined, Azure AD joined, in a work group, doesn't matter to us. As long as you've onboarded it into Defender for Endpoint and this device is connected to the internet, we're going to get information about it, right? We can see the OS, the build version, the SAM name. We can see any IP addresses that we want to, the last time it was seen, right? Are there any UAC flags, right? Account disabled, account locked. Are there any particular identifiers? There are 8 service principal names registered on this device. And what members, right? It's a member of domain computers, right? You can see it's got a risk level of high, an exposure level of medium, and 3 logged on users, the most of K. Dickens, the least of P. Gustavo. But really the reason we pivoted it in here was because we could take action from here. We were looking into that incident earlier and doing some research, but maybe the first thing that we should have done was isolate that device, right? When I isolate that device, it brings up the built-in Windows Firewall API, and it shuts down all communications outbound and inbound, for that matter, from this device, except between Defender for Endpoint and the device. Now, if I'm so inclined, I can allow Outlook and Teams to continue communication. So I could ping the user and be like, hey, we found something suspicious. I isolated your device. Just want you to know that I'm going to be working in here for the next few minutes, right? So we can isolate the device. We could also restrict the app execution, which means we would immediately block any applications that aren't signed by Microsoft, right? So any kind of exe or something that was running that isn't signed by Microsoft, we can stop that with a click of a button. And as we talked about, if you're using Defender antivirus, we could quickly run an antivirus scan just to clean things up or just as a proactive measure. Also have a few other actions we could take. We could collect an investigation package. So if this is something that maybe you are the initial investigator, but you have another team that you forward off these things to, just click this button. It's going to pull together all the running processes, things from the event log, what drivers are loaded at the time, right? So it'll collect that investigation package and put it in a zip file. And you can send that out to somebody or take some time to research that somewhere else. You can also initiate a live response. Again, super helpful these days because you can't just take the elevator down to see who these people, take a look at the machine because they may be sitting at their kitchen table like I am right now. So we can initiate a live response session, which will open up a shell between this machine and the infected machine. And we can run some commands. We could get a memory dump. We could do whatever we need to do more research on that particular machine. And we also have the ability to initiate an automated investigation. That's what we talked about earlier, right? And that's one of the strongest features of Defender for Endpoint is the ability to take advantage of machine learning and to really what we want to do is let the tool take action on these alerts and do the, if this is 2 o'clock in the morning, right, the tool can fully investigate all of the alerts. It will start looking at, processes, loaded modules, open handles, right? And it's going to look through everything that it can to see what's going on. Now, the tool can do that automatically, but maybe we're going to kick it off ourselves, right? Maybe we want to initiate our own automated investigation. And what happens if that automated investigation finds something, right? If it's a suspicious process, it'll terminate it. If there's a driver we don't like, we'll unload it. A service, right? Let's stop or disable it. Maybe we're going to remove a registry key or stop or remove a scheduled task. Those are all the things that might be done by initiating an automated investigation. We could also pivot from here into advanced hunting, but we'll go do that a little bit later. Let's jump back here into the incident itself. Let's assume we've isolated that device so that we can take our time and figure out what really happened here, right? So let me take a little sip here. Hang on. Let's go back to alerts. And let's take a look at the next one down the line. So this one is interesting, right? Because we're actually looking here into the messages. So we can see an actual email message here based on a potentially malicious URL was clicked. We can see, let's open up that email page. And again, this does assume that you are using Defender for Office and that you have clicked that button that has the two talking to each other. So we can see there was a threat of phishing in this particular one. It was sent to Carla Dickens from Irvin Walker at November 4th, right? We can see the timeline of what happened, delivered into the inbox, URL click, then the item was moved to quarantine. But even more interesting, we can dig in here and take a look at the analysis, right? What exchange transport rule was used? Is there any bulk level complaints here? What was the spam confidence level? DMARC, DKIM, any attachments, right? I don't think there were, yeah, no attachments. What was the URL? And again, if we wanted to, we could pivot into this URL and we can look for similar emails as well. Come on, there they go. So we actually did have a couple of similar emails, right? Delivered over the course of several weeks. So what we could be looking at here, honestly, this is probably some kind of spear phishing campaign, right? Because all of the recipients were Carla. If it were a regular phishing campaign, right, we assume that they were going to go wide, but this looks very specific. So Karen must have access to something that this particular bad person is looking for, right? I'm going to show you. So we talked about those automated investigations. We could certainly click here and look through every single one of these alerts, and you might see something interesting, right? You might see possible attempts to steal credentials. We might see lateral movement, suspicious service creation. So obviously, if we were investigating this incident, we would dig through all of those things. But one of the things that I like to do is pivot into the graph. This is all great, but when we look at the graph, I'm a super visual person. So we can actually see here a physical representation of what happened, right? We can see workstation 6 that we know is part of this particular attack. We see Carla, we know P. Gustavo was involved here, right? And the domain controller. We also see some stuff on the ADFS server. But the really cool feature here is the ability to play back the attack story. So when we actually can see here, it's going to walk through step by step what happened for us. So we can see the timeline, when it happened, right? Process code was injected, attempt to steal those credentials, email messages removed, suspicious user account discovery, and that lateral movement, right? Possible lateral movement here from one place to another based on the suspicious remote activity. Again, we said that service registration, the service creation, and a system executable being renamed and launched, right? So this is the same stuff that we saw on the alerts page. But to me, again, whichever one works best for y'all, feel free to continue to do that. But I love that graph and that playback so I can really see what happened at any given time. Exit the play mode. And but now that we know what happened, and we had the automated investigation set. We talked about earlier, there's actually, I guess, 3 types of investigation. No investigation, right? Don't let the tool do anything. A fully automated investigation, which is the default setting, which means the tool is going to do what it thinks it should, right? Terminate that process, unload that driver. Or what we call semi-automated, which means the tool is going to do the research, but it's waiting for you to come in and click it and say, okay. And again, you can have some machines that are fully remediated, some that are semi-automated. You know, you may have reasons. Certainly some hospitals don't want auto remediation on some devices that may be life-saving, or maybe it's just a C-level exec that doesn't want to have their device isolated in the middle of the day, right? But there were 7 automated investigations that got kicked off as part of this incident. So in the possible attempt to steal credentials, no threat was found. The suspicious URL clicked, no threat was found. And what that really means is that it was probably fixed before it got here by Defender for Office. But let's talk about that clicked URL verdict, or the malicious URL zapped, right? It's pending approval. It's waiting for us to go in there and say yes, right? So if we open that investigation page, we can see where did the alert come from, right? Came from Defender for Office. And in this particular method, we go counterclockwise. I'm not really sure why, but we're going to go left around the circle. We analyzed 1 URL, 1 email, and 5 email clusters. Found 7 pieces of incident of 7 entities of evidence, but it's waiting for us to go in and say do something, right? It's waiting for us to approve or reject. Now, the reason we recommend that you let the tool automate itself is obviously if this happens after hours on a Saturday, Sunday, you know, who knows when someone could come in and take a peek at it and do that approval, but you could have it sent to your phone. So entirely up to y'all on how you want to do it. But let's look at the log. This is the thing that I really love, is the ability to see exactly what happened. And the great part about the automation of this is it's going to do the exact same thing every single time, right? When it comes to the Defender for Office stuff, it's going to investigate mail forwarding rules, look at mail delegation, investigate for malicious mail sent, right? Has mailbox forwarding been set up? And then it's going to look all across every other mailbox and every other email cluster for similar behavior. And if you've said so, take that action. You can also see some of that information. Let's see if one of these other ones is fun to look at. Again, that log file, just to give you an idea of what all the tool is going to do for us. Checking machine coverage, it's looking for files, it's getting all the active connections, all the processes, all the services, all the drivers, all the file info, right? So it's doing this in a matter of seconds to minutes, right? So the goal is really, they've found that a fully automated investigation can do in about 5 minutes what it might take us about 6 hours to do, right? But do not be worried. That doesn't mean that your job is going away. It just means you get to do other more cool things, right? Now, we spent a lot of time looking at the incident investigation, and honestly, there's so much more we could dig into, looking at file hashes, things like that. But Defender for Endpoint, most EDR tools are reactive tools, right? I'm waiting for something bad to happen. But the thing that I like about Defender for Endpoint is its ability to be proactive and help us shrink our attack surface, right? We don't have to wait for something bad to happen. We can go ahead and look in the vulnerability management dashboard. So TVM for us, you may use a similar tool like Qualys or something like that, But the threat and vulnerability management dashboard here gives us a exposure score. You may be familiar with Secure Score from other Microsoft tools, but the thing about the exposure score, whereas Secure Score, you want it to be as high as you can be, exposure score, you want it to be as low as it can be. So a bunch of factors go into your exposure score. Weaknesses discovered in your devices, the likelihood that those devices could be breached, any relevant alerts that might be on the devices. So like we said, the goal is to lower that score as fully as possible. Then we have your secure score for devices. And this just narrows it down to applications versus OS versus network versus accounts, right? So if you want to see how this breaks down across those different things, we could dig in. We can see the top security recommendations, the top events. Well, let's going to dig in. Let's take a look at the recommendations. So the Defender for Endpoint TVM feature is continuously evaluating this. So this gets updated, I will say, probably every few minutes, as opposed to if you run a scheduled vulnerability scan, you have to wait for that scan to complete. But you can see that we have all different kinds of recommendations. And sometimes these recommendations are configuration changes. So these could be things like, if you're using Defender antivirus, turn on potentially unwanted protection, or you could be to turn on an attack surface reduction rule, something like that. But also software updates. So we can see here that we need to update 2016 server. Actually, let's do a little filter. I only want to look at the software updates. I don't want the configuration changes. Let's see what else we got. So we need to update Ubuntu. There could be a bunch of different stuff here. It could be updating WinZip. It could be updating, that's a lot of, looks like we got some very unhealthy Linux servers in here. Let's just take a quick peek at one of these. Again, we've got the circle versus the dig in, right? When I hit that circle, theoretically a flyout box should pop up. Come on, flyout box. There we go. So we can see here, what is this? You need to update server 2016 to mitigate 1,063 known vulnerabilities. Here's a list of exposed devices, right? So I could, if we're using Intune /SCCM, I can request remediation, which will open a ticket over inside Intune. And I can say, hey, I need you to patch this stuff for me. Or I could just export this out to an Excel spreadsheet and hand that off to my patching team, whatever you like. And we can see we have the exposed devices versus the installed devices and any associated CVEs. But here's the most important part of this to me. See, there's a little bullseye. I know this is super tiny, so you probably can't tell, but a little bullseye and a little beetle bug, right? So if the bullseye is red, it means that you have a device with an active alert that's directly related to this particular vulnerability. If you have the beetle bug that's red, because you can see these first two are red, these next couple are gray, right? You see the red, it means there's a known exploit out in the wild. Some bad person is taking advantage of this. They are already, right? There's an exploit kit. Let's see, I made that disappear, right? This exploit is part of an exploit kit. Known threats, right? It's going to tell you here, zloader, Baza loader, wormable, right? So all of these you're vulnerable to until you get this stuff fixed. So to me, whatever has a bug, fix it first, right? Everything obviously we need to fix when we can, but when you see that bug, let's fix that first. We also have a pretty decent list of software inventory, certainly reliable enough to use to check things against. We're not, if somebody has downloaded like a little exe onto the desktop, we may not have that recorded in here, but that's certainly our goal, is to get to the point where if there's software on that device, we're going to know what it is. But the weaknesses feature is also super helpful, right? There are 2,000 vulnerabilities in my org, 62 of them which are exploitable, 46 of which are critical, right? We can come in here, you know, maybe we were reading an article this morning that there's a new CVE out. Honestly, there was one I was just reading earlier, but I've already forgotten what it was. But let's just say here, we're gonna look for CVE 2020 dash 1972. Right, so this is a particular Oracle one, right, that I'm concerned about. I wanted to see if there's anything in my environment that might be vulnerable to this. There's a red bug for it, right, so that's no good, but it looks like I do have one device, right? So I can figure out, again, I don't know why that flyout is taking so long, but the flyout will eventually pop up here, I promise, and we'll be able to see which device that is, and we can quickly get that remediated. Same thing here, we can filter by, is an exploit available? Does it affect my organization, right? That's really the key. I don't care if there's an exploit out there if it doesn't affect my organization, right? And you can see here, there are times where a 0-day might come out, and we try to keep this as updated as quickly as possible so we can know about those as well. I have been talking a long time, but I'm going to show you one more thing and then we'll do some questions. So we talked about that ability to do the threat and vulnerability management so that we can be proactive in shrinking our attack surface. Another great feature we have is called threat analytics. And the threat analytics dashboard, I know if y'all are anything like I am, I wish I could do nothing all day but read blogs and catch up on all of the security trends, but there's a crap ton of work to be done, right? So we have a team who will do that for you. When we first introduced this feature, we thought we would publish maybe 1 or 2 a month, but you can see here, we're literally publishing these, you know, sometimes several a week. And these are insights to new attacks, new threats going on across the globe, right? So we got some ransomware, some phishing, some vulnerabilities, some activity groups here, right? And we can see that some of these I actually have threats in my environment on. So I'm going to go ahead and let's pivot here into the Nobelium campaign, right? What is the Nobelium campaign, right? You can read here what it was, right? Initially identified in 2020, Russian state-sponsored actor that was responsible for SolarWinds, right? So again, if you have time and you want to, you can read fully what that analyst report is. I have 3 active alerts and 1 active incident that has to do with this particular campaign and 1 impacted device, right? But I also have 21 misconfigured devices, which means they're also vulnerable to this. Now, the first thing I want to do, obviously, is view those impacted assets, make sure I don't need to do anything, right? Do I need to take them offline? Do I need to rebuild them? Do I need to run an antivirus scan? All of that stuff is super important. I want this to load faster because I want to say more things. But we will be able to see impacted devices and impacted mailboxes. Also, we can see those misconfigured devices. And that's really the key here. The misconfigurations, sometimes, because they're configurations, right? So I need to enable network protection or turn on real-time protection. So sometimes it's a settings change. Sometimes it's a KB. Doesn't look like this particular one is, but right, maybe we're missing a certain KB that we need to patch, right? But the thing about that is all of these, even if there is no active alert, right? Let's look at the macaw ransomware. They all will give you mitigations. I shouldn't say all, because clearly the one I pick isn't going to work, but many of these will have mitigations for you. And that way, like I said, let's be proactive. Let's shrink that attack surface. Let's fill those holes. So we have time to do other things, right? If we can shrink that attack surface, we won't have to be as reactive to those incidents because we're going to keep them from happening, right? Making sure things are patched and properly configured is really the #1 thing that we can do for security. And then right behind that, I'll put turning on MFA. Okay. All right. I'm going to stop talking. Who has questions?
Andrea, this is On. Thank you so much for going through the forensic, and it's very useful for me. And but I have several questions. The first one, the suspicious URL click on the email. So if we detect that it's malicious or suspicious email with URL on it, doesn't email already block you from that email instead of going to the user mailbox before the user actually click on it? It should be a filter already, right? That's my first question.
It should have been. If we let all the tools do what they're supposed to do, we will never have any incidents show up. So in this case, we turned off a lot of the security features. So absolutely.
Okay. Yes, because the reason I bring it up because I specifically have an incident in the past a few weeks ago. Alert from Microsoft say, okay, the email had been quarantined, the link had been quarantined, but still go to the user mailbox and the user click on it. So that's a few weeks ago. My second question is it too hard to say the user click on that URL that should send to training again because they're not supposed to click on the link, but they still do it. And then it's a I'm just like want to take care of the problem so it's not coming back again. And then is it firewall should be blocked that URL already if they know that a bad URL? We should have that from whatever firewall we're using. We should know that a bad URL should be blocked, that add to the firewall. And then Microsoft also blocked that from the email to coming in before the user hit to their mailbox. So that's my is that good solution to do so that it's not coming back again? Or what? Because we keep seeing this problem coming over and over from user to different user to different user with the same scenario. So that's it. I have a question. That's all I have.
No, that's a great. I will say I was talking with my sister at her company. She works at a large bank, and they've been doing, the phishing simulation, right? And they just have one user who has failed 5 times. She will just click on anything, right? And they're afraid they're going to have to fire her. But really, the true thing is, yes, let's get people as smart as they can be. Let's train them up so they don't click on these things. But someone is always going to click, right? So what we want to be able to do is prevent those other things, right? Like you say, turning on network protection, whether that's a firewall, the built-in Windows 10 network protection that prevents outbound traffic to those known malicious IPs, right? We want to do all of those things that we can to prevent those kinds of things from happening.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Of course. Anybody else? Come on, somebody else has a question.
I don't see any questions in the chat window. There's one about YouTube channel where this recording will be posted. Yes, Tim, I will provide it in just a second here. Any questions for Andrea? I guess not.
All
So,
right.
So it sounds like that's a wrap. So if you do have any questions, or after the webinar, or would like to spin up a trial, or are looking for assistance, please reach out to myself or Ashley or Andrea. We're more than happy to help you with your journey with MDE. So thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.